It started long before the goodbye, before the door closed behind him, before the silence settled like a fog over our home. My father had been unraveling quietly for months, maybe even years, though I didn't know it at the time. I remember the missed dinners, the way his chair remained empty more often than not. I remember the distant look in his eyes, a gaze that seemed to be fixed somewhere far beyond our walls, somewhere unreachable. Small fractures appeared in our family routine. A forgotten promise here, a sharp word there, a sigh heavier than the air itself. Each one seemed insignificant alone, but together, they stacked like bricks in a wall I couldn't see coming. I was too young to fully understand the signs, too young to put the pieces together, too young to comprehend that the man I loved was slowly slipping away. But I could feel it in the tension at the dinner table, in the sharpness of his silences, in the subtle absence of laughter that once filled the rooms. The distance between him and the rest of us grew imperceptibly at first. It wasn't loud, and there were no arguments that could explain it. Just a quiet separation, presence that became a shadow. Even as a child, I noticed the subtle patterns. I noticed how my mother's shoulders stiffened when he walked in, how she smiled less, how she tried to smooth over moments that should have been lighthearted. I noticed the way my siblings and I moved carefully around him, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. But I never imagined it would end in a goodbye. Because goodbyes are loud, aren't they? They are supposed to be moments of confrontation, of tears, of explanation. But his departure wasn't that. It was silent, invisible, like he had simply evaporated into the air we breathed. When he left, the world didn't collapse. It didn't erupt. It cracked slowly, like ice under pressure. The first cracks were subtle empty rooms, quiet meals, hushed conversations. But soon, the cracks widened, stretching across every corner of our lives. My mother became a force I had never witnessed before. She transformed overnight into someone who held everything together with a strength that surprised even herself. Her laughter returned, but it was different, softer, careful, measured. Her hugs were longer but heavier with unspoken words. She carried the weight of two parents now, but she never complained. And me? I learned responsibility too early. I learned resilience too young. I learned independence before I wanted it, before I had the right to. My childhood shrank, replaced with duties I wasn't prepared to shoulder. I remember doing homework with one hand while cooking with the other. I remember answering the phone for my mother while hiding my own sadness. I remember nights lying awake, wondering why my father's chair remained empty, and why no one explained it. Life demanded that we adapt, and adapt we did. But adaptation is a double-edged sword. It teaches you strength, yes, but it also teaches you how to carry absence like a second skin. The breaking point didn't arrive immediately. It crept in, carried on the slow passage of days, weeks, and months. Years later, I would recognize it fully when I realized his absence wasn't temporary. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't a mistake. It was permanent. The first time I truly felt the permanence, I was sitting in a classroom far from home. A friend spoke of their father, of weekend outings, of small moments of shared laughter, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had shared something like that with my own father. The absence became a ghost that followed me everywhere. In relationships, it planted seeds of doubt. Could I trust fully? Could I allow myself to depend on someone else? In achievements, it whispered a quiet uncertainty. Were my successes mine, or were they attempts to fill a void that could never be filled? The quiet loneliness was the hardest. No one could see it because I hid it well. I learned to wear a mask of normalcy while the emptiness gnawed from within. It was like carrying a wound that never scarred but never healed either. Some nights, I imagined him standing at the door, returning to us with explanations, apologies, answers I would never receive. Other nights, I imagined him elsewhere, happy, free, and entirely beyond my reach. The absence shaped the way I viewed love. I learned that love could be fragile, temporary, and unreliable. I learned that people you count on most can disappear quietly, leaving no trace except memories. I also learned that strength could emerge from voids. The void left by his absence demanded that I become self-reliant, that I learn resilience, empathy, patience. It was an unwelcome teacher, but an effective one. Friends noticed the difference in me. They saw maturity beyond my years, a seriousness that sometimes felt unnatural. They didn't know it was born from the quiet demands of a home fractured by absence. There were times when I resented him. Small sparks of anger flared when I saw other fathers play with their children or offer guidance that I had to seek elsewhere. The resentment simmered quietly, a companion I couldn't shed. And yet, there was longing intertwined with it, a desire to understand him, to know him, to forgive him, even when forgiveness felt impossible. That longing became both a burden and a guide, shaping decisions I made later in life. I noticed patterns in myself that mirrored his absence, a tendency to avoid confrontation, a hesitation to rely on others fully, a persistent need to prove my worth independently. It was like his departure had left invisible fingerprints on my soul. My mother often reminded me to keep going, to stay strong, to pursue opportunities even when the house felt empty. She became both the anchor and the sail, teaching me that survival required courage and love simultaneously. I began to notice small victories, moments of growth that no one else would witness. Completing a difficult task alone, supporting a sibling through fear, finishing schoolwork without complaint. These were my quiet rebellions against the emptiness. And yet, no victory erased the ache. No accomplishment restored what was lost. I learned to live with that tension, to carry the duality of pride and sorrow as if it were a single entity. There were years where I attempted reconciliation in my mind, imagining conversations, apologies, explanations that never came. The mind becomes creative when reality is absent, weaving stories that the heart clings to. The absence also taught me compassion. I realized that sometimes people leave not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay. Understanding that did not erase the hurt, but allowed me to see his humanity more clearly. In high school, I became fiercely protective of those I loved. Perhaps it was compensation, perhaps it was fear, but the experience of absence made me attentive to others' needs in ways I wouldn't have been otherwise. Romantic relationships became complicated. The fear of loss, the expectation of abandonment, the quiet skepticism that love could last, all shaped by the memory of his departure, affected how I connected, how I trusted, how I allowed myself to be vulnerable. Education became my refuge. Work, responsibilities, achievements, these were my anchors in a world adrift. Each success felt like proof that absence didn't define me, even as it continued to influence me silently. I noticed that some people never understood the subtlety of my struggle. They saw the strong one and assumed there was no pain. But the absence of a parent can be invisible, shaping the course of life in ways words cannot capture. Even today, decades later, I feel echoes of that day. The chair that remains empty in my memory, the silences at dinner, the lessons learned too early, the responsibilities I bore before I was ready. And yet, despite the pain, I recognize that his departure carved pathways I would spend a lifetime learning to walk. Pathways that led to resilience, empathy, independence, and an understanding of life's fragility. The goodbye didn't leave scars, it created landscapes. Landscapes I traversed carefully, but landscapes that also taught me how to survive, how to feel deeply, and how to understand both absence and presence in profound ways. By the time I fully realized the permanence of his absence, I understood that life had given me both a burden and a gift. The burden was the loss, the confusion, the loneliness. The gift was the depth of strength, resilience, and self-understanding that emerged from it. And though I sometimes still wish for explanations, for reconciliation, for the comfort of his presence, I also know that my journey through the aftermath of his goodbye has made me who I am. It started long before the door closed, but it continues, even now, a way I love, the way I trust, and the way I hold both absence and presence close in the same heart.